And judges can now introduce themselves.
Hi, good afternoon, Idaho, and congratulations on making it to the national finals. That's a great accomplishment in and of itself. My name is Ben Glickman. I'm actually an alumnus of this program. I represented California at the national finals back in 1995. In my day job, I work for the California Attorney General's office.
Good afternoon. I'm Dan Taubman. I'm a senior judge with the Colorado Court of Appeals in Denver, Colorado. And I'm not an alumnus of the program, but I worked with We the People and for many years.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ali Khan. I'm an attorney in Chicago. Like Ben, I too am an alum of the program, participating back in 1998 from the state of Illinois.
If you could introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Aiden Gardner. I'm a junior, and I chose to do this because I thought it'd be a fun experience to learn about the government.
Hi, I'm Samina Omar. I'm also in grade 11, and I chose to do this to learn more about our government.
Hi, my name's Shannon Hendricks. I am also a junior, and I chose to do this because I wanted to be able to debate about the Constitution.
All right, well, hopefully all those things have come to fruition during your year. We'll try to make this fun if we can. So your question this afternoon is number 1. I do not think the United States would come to an end if we lost our power to declare an act of Congress void. I do think the Union would be imperiled if we could not make that declaration as to the laws of the several states. What impact has judicial review had on federalism? Is judicial review a counter-majoritarian practice? Please support your position. What limits, if any, would you place on the practice of judicial review? Whenever you're ready.
Judicial review affects federalism by redistributing power within the government, the most important case being Marbury v. Madison, which created judicial review. This allowed Supreme Court justices to vote on whether cases brought up to them were constitutional. By voting on these cases, it would set new standards across the government. In Brown v. Board of Education, the redistribution of power can directly be seen. In this case, the Supreme Court made it unconstitutional for states to segregate public schools. Before this case, states were allowed to choose whether they allowed this action to occur, but SCOTUS took this right away. In return, it gave the federal government just a little bit more power. Another case that redistributed power within the government was Baker v. Carr. In this case, congressmen were unproportionally distributed by many states, which allowed rural citizens to have more influence on the government. As a result, the federal government forced states to update their county lines to prevent unproportional voting, which was not previously mandated. Throughout history, judicial review has impacted federalism by granting more power to the federal government at the expense of state governments.
Judicial review is a counter-majoritarian practice because of the selection of justices, the exclusion of citizens from judicial decisions, and the power to reverse legislative decisions. First, the process of selecting judges is undemocratic. They are simply nominated by the president and then approved by the Senate, and citizens lack the power to choose who will serve on the court. Secondly, there is no way for citizens to express their desire for a matter. Unlike the legislative branch, people cannot petition, lobby, or protest to make their preferences heard. They are powerless against the judicial branch. The final reason why judicial review is a counter-majoritarian practice is because the judicial branch has the power to reverse legislative decisions. The court has the power to pronounce acts of Congress as unconstitutional, and if they do, Congress doesn't have the power to override that decision. The process of electing justices, the exclusion of citizens, and the power to reverse legislative decisions show how judicial review is a counter-majoritarian practice.
There should be no limits placed upon judicial review. Judicial review is extremely important because it makes sure that each branch of government understands and recognizes its power. Take, for example, the case United States v. Nixon, which limited the power of the executive branch. Nixon claimed that he was immune from a subpoena because of executive privilege. The Supreme Court found that he was not immune from the subpoena and, by extension, the law. Without this review, then a defined limitation of executive privilege, we might have an executive branch that decides that they are above the law. Judicial review not only limits its power, but also adds some power, like in the case Gibbons v. Ogden. While taking away power from the states, the results from Gibbons v. Ogden also redefined some power by the legislative branch. It gave Congress the ability to regulate interstate commerce. Judicial review has also impacted the judicial branch with Marbury v. Madison. Their powers were redefined after this case, and they were given the power of judicial review. This is due to the fact that nothing about judicial review was ever written in the Constitution. The nation needs the ability to limit and update the powers of the branches that were not explicitly specified in the Constitution.
Thank you. So I think I heard you say that you're not proposing any additional limits on judicial review or the courts. What existing limits are there, and are they effective?
The existing limits on the The existing limits on the courts are the checks and powers that the legislative and the executive branch have. That's about it.
Okay, so like what can Congress do if the Supreme Court determines that something Congress did was contrary to law?
Congress can't do anything about that.
Let me jump in here real quick. With regard to Supreme Court, how do you feel about term limits for the justices?
I don't think that there should be any term limits for justices because term limits will make them be more partisan because they will want to be reelected. It's like we see in the legislative branch where the senators and congressmen, they are only doing things that will get them reelected. And we really don't want that to happen with our judicial branch because they are the people who are looking at our Constitution and defining if things are constitutional.
Well, I'm not proposing they be elected. I'm just proposing that, or asking that if they're appointed, that there's an expiration date on their term, whether it's 10 years, 20 years, whatever it may be. So not that they're elected.
I still don't think that there should be any term limits on it.
Okay.
Because, the term limits would limit how much they can do and the kind of wisdom they would have after working for so long. And yes.
Does anybody else agree or disagree?
Yes, I do agree with Shannon.
Okay.
So you said in your opening statement that the process of choosing Supreme Court justices is undemocratic because we don't vote for them. However, do you think that it's a good practice because do you think that it ensures that only well-qualified people are chosen to serve on the Supreme Court?
Can you clarify that question for us?
Well, do you think, let me rephrase it. Do you think that we should be able to vote for Supreme Court justices instead of having them chosen by the president and the Senate?
I definitely think that the people should have a voice and their opinions should be heard when choosing Supreme Court justices, because in the end, they're going to be there forever until they no longer are a judge on the Supreme Court. And if they're the ones who are going to make and decide things are unconstitutional, like laws made in Congress, they should have a say because then they are the ones who are going to be following the laws.
But don't they have a say? I mean, they elect the president and they elect their senators. So doesn't that give them some, and they're free to protest and write editorials and do all that stuff. Doesn't that give them some say in who the justices are going to be? So I guess I'll ask a little different frame of that question. So you said the judicial review is counter-majoritarian, and you provided 3 reasons why it was, and I appreciated that. Is the fact that it's counter-majoritarian, is that a problem? Is that something we should be concerned about? Does it not matter? What is the significance of judicial review being counter-majoritarian?
being counter-majoritarian is meaning like it doesn't take any input from the society or the citizens that are going to be having to follow all these rules. And of course, we have two different parties, but with different views. But in the end, we also have to follow these rules and that the court system deems unconstitutional or not.
So does it make judicial review like anti-democratic? Is it contrary to democracy? Or is it like a necessary thing in order to check the political branches?
I think it is anti-democratic since there's no people voting on who's going to be the justices.
I also think it is a very necessary thing, and I think it's necessary for it to be anti-democratic or whatever, because we need our judges to be nonpartisan and not to be influenced by external affairs. So we need them to not be influenced by society and by the citizens themselves, but are representative of the citizens in addition.
Real quick, you mentioned about the judges being nonpartisan and not being influenced by society. Do you think that's the case currently, and do you think that's realistic? Because it seems to me that we all know that this is a more Republican judge, a Democratic judge. Number one, but number two, people also live in the world, right? So how do you reconcile that reality with what you just said a few moments ago?
Throughout time on the court, they will become probably more evenly distributed between the two parties,
Okay.
which whenever they start out, they might be elected as far right, but eventually they might realize, oh, wait, I don't need to be that far right, and kind of towards the middle and become more nonpartisan because they don't need to be reelected by the citizens.
So do you have an example of that happening?
Yes, with Brett Kavanaugh, who was elected by President Trump, who is a Republican. He has more Republican views, but he still votes Democrat or whatever is the more right part of the case. He is not just limited by his views. Of course, we can't expect that our judges are going to be exactly nonpartisan because they are human, like you said, and they do have their own beliefs and they do have their own views, but not all of them let those views determine what they decide in cases.
Okay.
You mentioned in your opening statement Brown versus Board of Education. Do you think that when the Supreme Court decides cases, it protects the rights of minorities in the country? And if so, do you think it does that all of the time or just some of the time?
Yes, when Brown v. Board of Education happened, it made segregation in public schools unconstitutional. So it did set that new standard and it did prevent minorities from being segregated in some sense. Yes.
And we are not always correct. Brown v. Board of Education actually re-updated Plessy v. Ferguson, which again, if we were looking at it, that was the wrong decision that was made. So with new cases being brought up, we are progressing more and more. And yes, it doesn't always protect the minority rights, but we are assuming that our cases that will come up in the future will right those wrongs.
So the Supreme Court can't enforce its own decisions, right? It doesn't have an army or a police force or something to enforce them. Does that impact its decision-making, do you think?
No, I don't think it impacts the decision because they don't need that. With the decisions that they make, it sets new standards, like we stated earlier, and it pretty much creates a new.
You can finish your thought.
Okay. It creates a new law that everyone has to follow under. Otherwise, it'll be unconstitutional.
Thank you.
Thank you, and a round of applause for the students for all their hard work. All right, and now the judges have some feedback for you.
Sure, I'll start off. So I thought the presentation, I thought it did a nice job, beginning with Marbury and then providing some additional examples, Brown and Baker, of showing kind of this redistribution of power, which was your thesis. So I appreciated that. I also liked the that you clearly answered every question. It was easy to follow. You said judicial review is counter-majoritarian for 3 reasons, 1, 2, 3. And so I appreciated that. I think the most interesting part for me was the piece where you said that there should be no limits. And not only that, but you didn't really talk about any of the existing limits. And there are lots of existing limits, right? In addition to just fundamental checks and balances, Congress can pass a new law if a law is held to be problematic for reasons other than being unconstitutional. Congress can just pass a new law and try again. And likewise, the lack of enforcement power, I think, tempers the court's decision making. And then the court uses lots of its own internal doctrines, right? Standing and mootness and political question and different things that limit the number of cases it hears or the types of cases it hears. I think all of those are checks on the Supreme Court's power that prevent it from kind of running amok, although some would certainly disagree with that. Yeah, so the one thing I would note is it seemed like you guys were a little siloed in your expertise, or you felt like if I was asking a limits question, one of you had to answer it. If I was asking a counter-majoritarian question, another one of you had to answer it. And you shouldn't feel so constrained, right? You should all feel free to chime in. You're all experts on the whole subject matter, and you should feel free to chime in on any question. And as you were warming up in the Q&A, I think you started doing that more. But tomorrow, I would encourage you to do that. Don't hesitate to jump in, even if it wasn't the piece you spoke about in the prepared remarks. So nice job overall.
Yeah, I mean, great job, guys. Again, congrats for being here. I know it's not always easy to be on the other side of this. I want to echo everything that Ben said. The one thing I will point out in regards to free response, I think everyone should feel free to jump in. Feel free to disagree with your colleagues. If you feel your colleague is kind of out of things to say, for lack of a better phrase, it's okay. Like, make sure for tomorrow you jump in and kind of pick up the mantle and say, well, building upon what my colleague said, or I disagree with my colleague, but kind of keep that train moving. You don't want to have too many gaps of silence. Other than that, feel free to go more in depth, right? And maybe even acknowledge, why the counterpoints with term limits. You obviously were against it, but maybe perhaps to get some more, substance in there, you can acknowledge, some people may support term limits and this is why, but, we do not support it for these reasons because, let me tell you, I'm not saying I support it or not. I guess what I'm saying is the people that do would make arguments of, it's to make it very simple. Should someone be, in one position for 40 years, right? Does that make sense, right? So what if your term limit was like 20 years? Does that give them enough time to, not be swayed by the winds of the day, but still not, 40, 50 years where either you've become lost touch or just not the way society's moving. Again, these are all theories, but understanding both sides will allow you to have more substantive conversation, kind of keep it going. So make sure you do that for tomorrow. But other than that, like I said, you guys come off well. So just keep that aspect up, right? You speak well. But other than that, great job. Like I said, fix those things for tomorrow. But but you guys did a good job otherwise.
I think you did a nice job answering the questions. I liked your reference to United States v. Nixon to show that the courts can exercise control and help protect our system of checks and balances. That was good. I liked also that you said that the power of judicial review is not in the Constitution, which is good. I know you mentioned Marbury v. Madison. You might have mentioned Federalist 78, which was written before the Constitution was adopted, but also talked about the importance of judicial review. And I liked in your answer to the question about whether judges or justices stay the same, you mentioned Justice Kavanaugh and how he's moderated his views since he's been on the Supreme Court. I would have liked to have seen some examples of that to strengthen your position. or you might have mentioned other justices like Justice Warren or Justice Stevens, who were appointed by Republican presidents, but became more moderate or more liberal once they were on the Supreme Court. That would have strengthened your presentation. Overall, though, I think you did a nice job, and congratulations.